Okay, so we talked about the early Byzantine. We talked about the late antiquity, which is kind of a period that's a transition between the Roman Empire and the Byzantine. So now we're going to get into the Middle Byzantine, not Middle Byzantine. That's silly. Okay, so if you recall from last time, big thing happens at the end of the early Byzantine, and that's the iconoclasm. Okay, so it's this idea that's particularly put forth by the emperor at the time, Leo III, and basically he thinks that God is punishing the Byzantine Empire because of icon worship. Okay, we talked about icons, which are religious paintings for personal use. And so in 726, Emperor Leo bans picturing the divine throughout the empire. Okay, so he's decided that this is blasphemous. So then, in the Middle Byzantine, we get some kind of clapback, as you would say in today's vernacular. Sorry, against that. So we have the anti-iconoclasm. And this is the argument that God made an image of himself in Jesus and in creating man in general. So Empress Irene in 780 and Empress Theodora in 843 both have echo these same ideas, these empresses coming in kind of trying to influence what's going on. And they say that the iconoclasm is heresy. It actually goes against God's intentions because God made man in his image, and so how can it be unacceptable to have images of the divine if God did that himself? Okay, so that's the anti-iconoclasm. So that's what's happening at the beginning of the Middle Byzantine. So the tides kind of turn and images are back. Okay, so icons are back. It's okay to portray the divine again in the Byzantine Empire, and as kind of a celebration of that, this is one of the first big commissions after the iconoclasm is lifted. So this is the Theotokos and child. Theotokos is a word that's one of your vocabulary words for the Byzantine, and that means the same thing as the Madonna. So it's Mary, the mother of Jesus. The word for her in Greek that is used in the Byzantine Empire is Theotokos. So that's a word that you need to recognize. So this is the Theotokos and Child Enthroned. It is a mosaic, and it's in the apse of Hagia Sophia, which we talked about last time. So that's the big church that Justinian commissioned in Constantinople. So this is a very large mosaic. It is 16 feet tall, so it's very grand. So it's kind of really celebrating, like, icons are back. We can show depictions of our divine and holy figures again. It's commissioned by Basil I. So he is the new emperor at this time. This is dedicated in 867. And he regarded himself as the restorer of the Roman Empire. There's an inscription on this that says pious emperors, which by this he means the Macedonians, which Basil was the head of that dynasty, replace the mosaic the imposters, which is the iconoclasts, had destroyed. So a lot of the images that existed prior to the iconoclasm were actually destroyed, were removed from churches, and so a lot of artwork was destroyed or damaged. So this is Basil I inscribing this, saying that the pious emperors, like me, Basil I, are restoring these things that were lost. So this artwork officially marks the end of the iconoclasm. Now when we look at this, this becomes kind of a standard portrayal of Mary and Jesus. So we see Mary wearing blue. She's often depicted as wearing blue. She has the baby Jesus on her lap. She has a halo, as you notice, and Jesus has his halo, which is the cruciform halo, right? So that we know that it's Jesus. Okay. There are some other popular ways that Christ is portrayed at this time. Like I said at the beginning of this, the image of Jesus is still kind of being defined and how it's going to be portrayed because this is a new religion, right? So one of the popular ways that he is portrayed is Christ as Pantocrator. Pantocrator, pan meaning all, Pantocrator is like a dictator, basically, so it's the ruler of all. So this is Christ as Pantocrator, meaning it's kind of like the idea of the King of Kings thing. So he's often portrayed like this. I think of this as kind of the angry Jesus. He looks kind of angry to me. So Pantocrator is the word that you need to know for this. This is one of your vocabulary words. And this particular example is from Daphne, Greece, which is part of the Byzantine Empire at this time. Greece is part of the Byzantine Empire. And Pantocrator was a popular portrayal of Christ in the Middle Byzantine. Sometimes this is labeled as Christ at the Last Judgment. So this is kind of almost the opposite of Christ as the Good Shepherd that we looked at in the early Byzantine, where he's sort of friendly and protecting his sheep, his flock of people. This is Christ who is come back for the final judgment, and he's much more serious, okay, much more stern. You notice that we still have his cruciform halo. He's often holding the book, the Bible. He's often holding the Bible in this portrayal. Sometimes he's in a mandala, so he has a kind of circle or an oblong circle surrounding his entire body. And this is another popular portrayal of him. It becomes very popular in the Middle Byzantine. Okay, another thing that we start seeing is, we start seeing portrayals of the crucifixion. So up until this point, this particular subject matter had kind of been skipped over in visual portrayals because it's disturbing. You know, it's very sad. It's when Christ was executed. And so in this time, post-iconoclasm, the act of sacrifice becomes kind of an important aspect of the visual imagery for the Christian church. So we start seeing crucifixion images at this point, and there's lots of different kinds of symbolism here, and the way the crucifixion is portrayed changes a little bit from time to time. This is from the Church of the Dormition. Dormition is it means sleeping. It's like the same root word as dormant, so it's like the Latin for sleep. So this is one of the earlier portrayals of the crucifixion. You can see he has his cruciform halo. He has a beard because, you know, Christ's humanity showing him age has become a thing that is part of his portrayal. The skull on the ground below the cross is a symbol of death, but also in this particular instance, it's Christ conquering over death because he comes again. We have the Virgin Mary depicted in blue again. This is often how she's depicted in the Byzantine, and she's weeping, she's mourning. We have her there, and then to his right we have John the Apostle. So in the Gospel of John, that's the most complete description of the Passion. So he is often portrayed alongside the crucifixion. You can see the stigmata, the nails in the hands. So this all becomes pretty standard in terms of the depiction of Christ's crucifixion. You'll also notice that there's blood and water coming from the spear wound in his side. That also becomes kind of a standard part of this depiction. But one of the other things I want you to take note in the Middle Byzantine is how we're getting further and further into abstraction. So it's less and less of a focus on naturalism and portraying things how they are in the world. The folds of the clothing seem pretty arbitrary. They don't really have anything to do with the way the body is formed underneath. The perspective is very weird. If you look at the cross, the perspective is not correct. The background is just all gold, so it's like they're floating in this kind of golden haze. So we start seeing moves further and further into abstraction. And that's something that we see throughout the Middle Ages, okay? And we don't kind of come back to naturalism and an interest in accurate portrayal of perspective and the human anatomy and things until we get to the Renaissance. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a story about a figure that I think is super fascinating. So this is Empress Zoe Porphyrogenitta. She's on the right here. And this is obviously Jesus in the center. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this figure. So this is Constantine the Ninth, so he's the emperor at the time that this is, well, not at the time it's created. It gets edited a few times, and I'll explain that to you. But at its final dedication, he's the emperor. He's married to Empress Zoe. We have Christ in the center. Okay, so let me tell you about this figure. Empress Zoe Porphyrogenita. Her last name is Greek, and it means born of purple or born to purple. So purple is a color that only royalty are allowed to wear. The dye that is used to make that royal purple is very expensive and very time consuming to make. It's called Tyrian purple. It's made from sea snails basically, but only a few little drops can come from each snail, and it's very, very expensive to make and all this. So that's why only royal people are allowed to wear it. So having the last name born to purple means you're born to rule. So that's literally her name. She's born in 978, and she's the daughter of Constantine the Eighth. She was not allowed to marry until 1028, right before her dad died. And she's married to a guy named Romanos III. So he was who her father wanted to be his successor. So that's why her father made her marry him right before her dad died. She did not want to marry him. She was in love with someone else. So she, murders her husband. It's not funny, I shouldn't laugh. She drowns Romanos III. She drowns him in a bathtub. And then she marries Michael the Fourth. On the day her husband dies, she immediately gets remarried to the person that she actually wanted to marry. They adopt a son who is named Michael the Fifth. Once he comes of age into power, he exiles Zoe. He thinks she's treacherous, so her son exiles her. Then she returns to Constantinople, raises her own army, and deposes her son, Michael the Fifth. And she rules in her own name, just as Empress Zoe. She isn't married for a while. Something mysterious happened to Michael's father, by the way. It's unclear. And then she decides to marry Constantine the Ninth, Monomachos. And so this is the portrait of the two of them. Now, when she first commissioned this piece, she was a big patron of the arts. This is in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Her first husband was depicted with her. And then after he died, she murdered him. She has it edited and has her second husband. So she has them come in and literally chisel his face off and put the new husband and the new name. You can see that it's a little disturbed where the name is. And then after there's no more Michael, and she gets married again, she has them come in again and edit it and chisel the face off and chisel the name out and change it again. So she has it edited a few times. So the emperor is holding a purse showing his generous donation to the church. The inscription says Pious Emperor and King of the Romans and Pious Empress, which that's what it says on the scroll that she is holding. And I just think it's kind of an interesting thing that we have this editing happening. Okay, so that's just a little aside for you. We can see again, this is another trend that we see that's coming back after the iconoclasm. So remember I showed you in early Byzantine, Justinian and his empress Theodora were portrayed in mosaic in Ravenna. And were portrayed as great patrons of the church, basically. So that also becomes a thing again. So not just showing images of holy figures like Christ, like Mary, but also showing the patrons of the church, the people paying for the artwork or paying for the church. That becomes quite popular again. So we start seeing people who are political figures, are the ruling figures portrayed alongside the holy figures in the church. Okay, let's go to Venice, shall we? So this is Venice. This is San Marco, and this is the interior of San Marco. And so St. Mark's it has a long history. It's the cathedral in Venice. So St. Mark's Martyrium and Palace Chapel sat on the site, and they were destroyed by fire in 976. So there was already something devoted to St. Mark and his martyrdom in Venice. In 1063, Doge Domenico Constarini begins construction of San Marco Cathedral to replace the martyrium and chapel that burned down. They were part of the royal complex there. So a doge is like a duke, kind of. So these are the people who are in charge of Venice. Okay, so this is a cruciform plan that has a central dome and a huge dome over the crossing. And then it also has 4 other domes over the arms. So it's a Greek cross, meaning the plan looks like a short cross where all 4 arms are the same length. So it's more square. The whole thing is covered in mosaic, and it's almost entirely gilded. So there's 40,000 square feet of mosaics. It's an incredible site. Highly recommend you check it out if you're ever in Venice. So Venice obtained the relics of St. Mark from Alexandria in Egypt in 829, and then the Doges of Venice create the shrine. The shrine burns down. So after it's destroyed, they decide to build this really grand cathedral. It's based on the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. This is part of Byzantium at the time, part of the Byzantine Empire, and so they are very much in keeping with this style. Everything heavily gilded, everything mosaiced. The central dome is 80 feet above the floor, and it's 42 feet in diameter, so pretty large. And there's, like I said, there's the additional domes that kind of encircle it on the arms. Okay. So, let's see here. Within San Marco, we have lots and lots and lots of mosaics. They're quite beautiful, but this one is pretty important. This is the earliest recorded depiction of the Last Supper, which becomes a pretty iconic image in Christian art. It's very popular in the Renaissance later. So here is the earliest depiction of that scene. And you can see that we have this further abstraction. Everything's gold. Not just the background is gold, the table's gold. Everything is very flat. It looks very two-dimensional. All of the drapery and things that should make it look three-dimensional are very arbitrary and just further flatten everything. The perspective on the table, you see the top of the table in the same plane as the front of the table. Very, very flat, very, very abstract. All of the apostles have halos. Christ has his cruciform halo. That's how we know who he is. So this kind of depiction becomes quite popular later. But as I said, as we move into the Middle Ages, everything just becomes increasingly abstract. This is the Harborville triptych. So this was a portable shrine. So post-iconoclasm, this idea of personal artwork used in worship is increasingly popular. So this is kind of like an icon, but instead of being painted in encaustics or tempera, we have it carved. It's a relief carving in ivory. So this would be much more expensive than a painted shrine. So this is Christ enthroned with the saints. We can see him in the center on the throne, holding the Bible, fingers in a sign of blessing, has the cruciform halo, kind of all of the things that let you know that that is Christ. John the Baptist and Mary are the 2 figures on either side of him, which is pretty typical of this time period. We have a lot of depictions of Mary and John the Baptist with him. Okay. Then in the middle, Byzantine, we start seeing a return of interest in fresco painting. So not just mosaics, but also painting. This is the Lamentation. It's in Neresi, Macedonia, which is just north of Greece. The Lamentation is a thematic Christian scene that is depicted over and over again. It's when Christ comes down off the cross. So the deposition is when he's removed from the cross, and then when he is just kind of laying there after being removed from the cross with Mary and oftentimes John crying over him and lamenting his death. This becomes a popular scene. So it's interesting because we have a lack of interest in naturalism. It's still fairly abstract. The anatomy doesn't make sense. It looks like all their shoulders are dislocated. Everything's pretty flat. The folds and the draperies are quite arbitrary. But we have this intense emotionalism, which isn't something that we saw as much in the early Byzantine. So this interest in showing grief and emotion while having this slightly more abstract kind of depiction is pretty interesting. We also have a little bit of a nod to naturalism and the return of the landscape in that we, instead of just having a gold background, we have an actual natural looking landscape here, which is a little bit different than what we have seen. Okay, so this is Joseph, Mary. Mary is crying on his face, set in a landscape, contrast to the gold background. Then we start seeing even more of a return to natural backgrounds. So as we get later, we see a little bit more of this. So this is called the Paris Psalter because it was found in Paris. And this reasserts the artistic values of the Greek and Roman past, of kind of the classical past. So we have more naturalized looking figures. We have them set in an actual landscape, kind of a Hellenistic naturalism. We have David the psalmist here with his harp playing for all of these animals. Melody is the woman, it's Melody personified as the woman kind of looking over his shoulder. It's Echo behind the column. So these are both Greek mythological personification figures who are there inspiring David's song. So we see several references here. We have these allegorical figures that are from mythology, not from the Bible, who are being interspersed in a story that's biblical, which is kind of interesting. The mountain behind is the mountain of Bethlehem, so we also have this kind of these mythological figures grounded in this biblical setting. This is the Virgin of Compassion icon. It's also sometimes called the Vladimir Virgin. So this is late 11th century, and this is tempera paint on wood. This is a very famous icon. It's very bizarre looking. The Christ figure is very strange, but it's quite popular. And if you look at her face, I think the Virgin Mary's face is why this is an icon that has really been renowned over time. She's depicted in dark blue again, which is her color. We don't have the cruciform halo here, but we know this is Christ because of the context of Mary holding him. Again, this return of personal icons. We have all this pathos, all this emotion being shown in her face, and she's contemplating the death of her son in the future because she knows that's his destiny, is to die for the sins of man. So there's a lot of emotionalism that gets incorporated into works from this time. Okay, next we'll talk about the late Byzantine.